So, Shabbat Shalom, everybody, and those that are going to watch later, Shabbat Shalom. And we are in Parashat Emor this week, which begins in Leviticus chapter 21 and goes through chapter 24, verse 23. So, this week's parasha is called Emor, which is from the root Amar, which means to speak or to say or utter. So the conjugated form, a lot of time we see of that as Yomer. So, and the focus on this one is on more than just what we speak, but it's also in the context of obedience to what Yah speaks. And so this parasha continues with rulings for how to live a set apart life or be holy, as we can say, and it actually is a continuation of last week's parasha. And it begins with giving more commands for the set apartness of the priest or the high priest in chapter 21. So I'm not going to read all of this. I just want to look. So if you look at chapter 21, this is talking about more rules for the high priest about who he should marry, not coming in contact with dead. And then it continues on in chapter, 22, and also, but talks about giving more commands, not only for the high priest, but for priests in general. And then it also goes into what offerings would be acceptable. In chapter 22, it starts in verse 17, talking about, not offering blemished animals and things like that. Okay. So in chapter 21 and 22, I wasn't planning on talking about anything but one verse in chapter 22. So is there anything in particular y'all want to talk about there before we get started in chapter 21 or 22? Are we okay?
We're good.
All right, good. Y'all good. Okay. No, you're okay. Okay. Sorry.
What did he say?
What? Mom was going to ask a question. Mom was going to ask a question, and then she's like, "No, it's going to just take too long. I'm going to go on, and I won't say anything." And Eddie said, "Well, that's just a miracle right in itself." So,
ooh, Eddie, shame on you.
Yes. So you have to watch him.
Consider the source, Joyce.
Consider the source. Yes, consider the source. That's yeah. She say Woody just said she's wanting to get to the important part. Okay. Yeah, Eddie said she's not going to hold her peace for long. So okay. So the one verse I do want to look at in chapter 22 is in verse 31, and it's right at the end of the chapter. Because recently, last 4 months, I've really been digging into tabernacle, temple service, looking at ancient Near East history in addition to the scripture and in reference to the scripture. So as I was looking at that, and we go into the next chapter, I think these two are connected. So Leviticus 22, verse 31. You are to keep my mitzvot and obey them, for I am Yah. You are not to profane my holy name. On the contrary, I'm to be regarded as holy among the people of Israel. For I am Yah who makes you holy, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I am Yah. Okay, so if we look at this passage, and you actually go back to verse 26, we see that, that other chapters were addressing the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, and the Kohanim, the priest. But in verse 26, we see that this passage through the end of the chapter is actually not addressing the priest, but it's actually addressing everyone. Okay, so here it's talking, it says, you are not to profane Yah's name. And there are lots of teachings out there on what does that mean to profane his name. Growing up, you think about, you don't say GD, whatever, that's going to profane his name. But I want to look at what this passage says. So looking at verse 31, you are to keep my mitzvot and obey them, for I am Yah. You are not to profane my holy name. On the contrary, I will be regarded as holy among the people of Israel. So when we look at this, it is actually linking profaning his name with keeping his mitzvot. And it says that, we aren't to profane his name because we're to regard his name as being set apart. And how do we do that? If you look at the context of the verse before that, it's tied to your actions. Because a lot of times we think, oh, well, we're profaning his name. It's just by us saying something about him or using our words or saying bad words or whatever. But yet we can profane Yah by our actions. So our behavior out in public can either sanctify him or it can profane him.
Wow.
Yeah. And so thank you, Dawn, for saying that, because that's exactly what I wrote in my notes. Wow. I told Dawn, I said, thank you for saying, wow. And I said, that's exactly what I wrote. Because how much more should we be watching over not only our words,
Our actions,
but our actions? Because basically, we are Yah's representative to the rest of the world.
That's right.
Yep.
So when they are seeing us out in public or whatever, do they see him or are they seeing the world?
Right.
So, and this is real. I mean, like I said, a lot of this is stuff I've been dealing with. So this is not talking about y'all. This is talking to me, because thinking about really my life and what I should be doing and how I should be acting. Am I really portraying him when people see me, or are they seeing the world in me instead of him? So, and this made me think about how even more it's tied to our actions, because one prime example is Moshe. If we go to Deuteronomy chapter 32. And this is here at the end, 32 of Moshe's life. Okay. Yeah. Deuteronomy 32. And we're going to go down to verse 49. Okay, so this is near the very end. Okay, so I'm going to read right here, and it says, and I'm just reading it out of, I think this is the New King James or King James Version. So, and the Lord spoke unto Moses the selfsame day, saying, get thee up on this mountain, Abarim, unto Mount Nebo, which is in the land of Moab, that is over against Jericho, and behold the land of Canaan, which I give unto the children of Israel for possession. And die in the mount whither thou goest up, and be gathered unto thy people, as Aaron and thy brother died in Mount Hor, and was gathered unto his people. Because ye trespassed against me among the children of Israel at the waters of Meribah Kadesh, in the wilderness of Zin, because ye sanctified me not in the midst of the children of Israel. So look at what it's saying. The reason is because you didn't sanctify me. You did not set me apart. You did not do that. So if you're not sanctifying him,
Wow.
the opposite of sanctification or set apart is common, holy, or profane, which where we get in this parsha, the whole. So, and it says, you shall not see the land before thee. Okay, so how did Moses not sanctify Yah?
Well,
Striking the
Obedience,
rock.
not
He's
obedience.
striking the rock.
Yeah, he struck the rock. So it was how he acted. It was his actions. He disobeyed Yah. He struck the rock. And so, this is important then, but even more so today, because many, claim to be in the body, but their actions look like the world around them. And, this makes me think about the verse in Matthew chapter 7. And we've read this one numerous times. Matthew 7, verse 21. Let me go there. And this is, this is one of the scary verses to me. If you think about scary verses in the Bible, to me, this is one of them. Something that I would see as being scary. Matthew 7:21. That says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. Only those who do what my Father in heaven wants. On that day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, didn't we prophesy in your name? Didn't we expel demons in your name? Didn't we perform many miracles in your name? And then I will tell them to their faces, I never knew you. Get away from me, you workers of lawlessness. Now,
think about that.
They are dead.
But in his name.
In his name. Yeah. And so this is not just about their words, it was about their actions and their heart. And to think about, who is he talking to? Is he talking to the unbeliever? No. But it's the one who's calling on me, Lord, Lord. And they're even prophesying, they're casting out demons. And he's saying, I didn't know you.
Translation where where it talks about that he never knew.
Mhm.
Is that Greek translation there? Does that mean they were never saved?
Okay. Well,
Because how
yeah, I mean,
casting out
in the
demons,
Greek,
how they're casting out demons,
yeah, because for you to cast out a demon, you've got to be, because the house divided. Yeah.
A demon is not afraid of a non-believer.
Yeah.
It's got Yeshua in them some part, but it says, I never knew you.
Yeah, and I think that's part of where, and I'd have to look because I don't know the Greek as well, but I'd have to look because it does say that the Greek is the, how do you say it, odipot or pote, I'm not sure how you pronounce that, but it, according to the Strongs, it is never, but could it be not? You know what I'm saying? Where it says, I don't or know you, not that I never knew you. Yeah, yes, sir. Yeah, that I don't know, which I do not 100%. Yeah, because it would be like, I don't know you but I did know, I used to know you, but I don't know you now.
Be along the same line of somebody being lukewarm.
Yeah.
Holding on the world.
Yeah. He was just saying with that, also ties in with someone being lukewarm, holding on to the world and then trying to hold on to Yah too. And he's saying, I don't know you. Because even in Revelation, he tells what's going to happen. I would rather you be hot or cold. Because if you're lukewarm, I'm still going to spit you out. But it's better that you would make a choice. Yeah.
Well, in the prophecy of judgment, it says Israel cried to me, and I thought, we know you.
Yeah.
And he said no.
Yeah, I don't know you because of why? Because of their actions. She was just talking about in Hosea that even says that, that Israel will cry out, yeah, that we know you, but it is saying that, that he's saying because what he didn't know them, because what were they doing in Hosea's day? They were actually corrupt. Yeah. So, even Yeshua gives us this warning in Matthew 7, especially, in the end times and the last days, is not just about your words, but it's about your actions. And not only that, but it's about your heart, because you could do all of the right things.
Well, when Yeshua said that, is he taking them back and letting them think what Hosea said,
Well, yeah, yeah.
because they would.
They know, yeah, they would have known it. But, yeah.
He's taking them back to that scripture.
And to think about your actions, because think about too, well, you could do all the right things. You could be the, perfect little person, not, say things or whatever, not eat things, not do certain things. But if your heart is not right,
Yep.
you're still not right. Because even think about when they were going to bring the offering in the temple, and Yeshua tells them in Matthew, he says, if you have aught against your brother,
Leave that good
your offering's not
deal.
going to be accepted. You need to first go get your heart right before you do that. And so it's always been a matter of your heart. So we can't just go through the motions without the right heart. We have to have that. And I've got a friend that always says right heart posture. No, have the right heart posture, and doing things, or otherwise it's going to be in vain.
Well, even atheists.
Yeah.
Do a lot of good works.
Yeah.
Helping people poor, they do a lot,
Mhm.
but they don't even believe in God.
Yeah, he was just saying that even atheists will do lots of good works. You have a lot of people that aren't believers
Right.
that will do lots of good works and donate to charities and do things and help people out or whatever. But, that's still, yes, that is good, but still.
But their heart's not.
Their hearts, yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. Right. And you think about, Jack was just saying, think about Moses. He was a prophet of God, and that he makes that one mistake because why? It says too much, to the person much is given, much is required. So he is held to a higher standard than everybody else. And so when you think about, it is a difference of, there are different categories of people, and especially if you're teaching or doing other things, that you're held to a higher standard. And I mean, you think about even just in general with your kids, you might say, when they were little and growing up, oh, you don't need to curse or whatever. We think about, with idling, when you think about people, when people say things and they hear stuff or whatever, and you're talking about, oh, you should, they heard other people say stuff, and then the little kid's going to do what? They're going to repeat it regardless, And so it is not about just saying with your mouth. You have to watch your actions. So actions speak louder than words. Yeah.
Even with Yeshua saying that, it's scary.
Yeah, that's what I said. This is a scary verse.
He said, the prophets,
Mhm.
Hosea, and all them, but yet look what happened to King Saul. That's more scary too,
Yeah.
because he started hardening his heart against the Lord.
Yeah.
Which was the same thing. And God took the Holy Spirit away.
Yeah, and she was just talking about even, back at, think about with King Saul and even with Eli and the prophets, that came to a point where they didn't even realize the point when the spirit had left. That was Ichabod. So, yeah. Yeah. That's why I said, as long as we're still being convicted, that's a good thing, because of the fact that the spirit's still there. But if you're not getting convicted on stuff, then you're just like, okay, you need to start working.
And you know what? Pray what David prayed.
Mm.
I always pray at night. I say, Lord, I know I sinned against you.
Mhm.
I ask you to forgive me. And I said, I'm going to pray what David prayed. Please don't ever take your spirit from me.
She was just saying that one prayer that she has this night is, we all have sinned and stuff, is to pray that don't let, like David prayed, don't let your Holy Spirit be taken away from us, or harden our heart.
Psalm 51.
Yeah. What was that again?
It's Psalm 51.
Psalm 51. So, okay. So with this, like I said, this is talking about being holy. We get into the next chapter, which is talking about the feast. Okay. So, which is interesting here. Okay. So I am not going to do a study on the feast, but I just want to read through a little bit, okay? And then we'll touch on some things here. Okay. So in Leviticus chapter 23, so first in verses 1 through 4, Yah says to Moshe, tell the people of Israel the designated times of Yah, which you were to proclaim as holy convocations, are my designated times. Work is to be done on 6 days, but the 7th day is a Shabbat of complete rest, a holy convocation. You are not to do any kind of work on it. It is a Shabbat for Yah, even in your homes. These are the designated times of Yah, the holy convocations you are to proclaim in their designated times. Okay, and then it goes into, in verse 5, it starts talking about the 14th day of the month is Pesach. The 15th day begins unleavened bread, and that, unleavened bread is additionally for 7 days here. And then in verse 10 and 11, that you shall bring the first fruits offering during that time, and depending on, how you count. And then it goes down into, where is it? So that all of that is. Then verse 15 and 16, that you shall, verse 16, you shall count the morrow after the 7th Shabbat, and you shall number the days. And so we get into Shavuot. Okay, so then we start getting into the counting and getting into Shavuot. And then we go down to verse 24, in the 7th month, the first day of the month, Yom Teruah or Rosh Hashanah. And then we get to verse 27, we have Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. And then we get to verse 34, where we have the 15th day of the 7th month begins Sukkot. And then we have Sukkot for those 7 days, and then it has an 8th day attached to that. But most of us, and I say most, not all, but most of us have been in this for a while, and we're familiar with the feast. Okay. And like I said, I'm not going into the feast in detail, but I wanted to look at a certain aspect. So I will apologize for those who have not been in this for a while and who are not familiar with the feast. Then go back and look at what the feast means, okay? Because that's going to be another story. But for those of us who've been in the while, this is for you. Because as we think about, just think back to when you first started doing the feast. Okay, how you used to do it to how you do it now. And then the farther along you got, the question always seems to arise, when do we celebrate? Many of us, and I'm just thinking about me here, when I first started following the feast, I started by doing the dates on the Jewish calendar. Then as I grew in my knowledge, I realized there were some things there that I did not like, and so we saw that there were some errors, and I started following another calendar, the Aviv calendar. And then, like the sighting of the new moon. And nowadays there's all different kinds of calendars out there. So you've got the lunar Shabbat, you've got the Aviv calendar, you've got the Zadokite calendar, you've got the Essene calendar. And like I said, for those who aren't familiar with this, then okay. So the question comes up then, which one do we follow? What's right? And the people who follow each one of those have reasons that they are doing each one of those calendars and why they follow them. And to be honest, this year, Yah's been dealing with my heart about being more humble and kind and in unity.
Thank you, Lord. All right.
So,
Somebody got a counsel.
and one thing that I've noticed, and I guess the past 26 years plus of doing this Hebraic lifestyle or Torah observant or whatever you want to call it, that there are issues with calendars, and that these are most divisive issues, not decisive, divisive issues. And, people are dividing all the time over the calendar. So first I want to look at how it was done during Yeshua's day. Okay. So are y'all,
Yeah,
Some
I
know, some- okay, yeah.
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 A lot of questions.
So
I'm ready.
in Yeshua's day, the month was determined by people that were going out. They were sighting the new moon. So that's the calendar. They're going out sighting the new moon. Okay. And these men had to be men of good character, good standing, good name, whatever. And then they would go. There had to be at least 2 or 3 witnesses that would go then and that spotted the new moon in Jerusalem, and they would run to the temple. They would notify the Sanhedrin because they're in the right at the holy place where the Nicanor gate is the lower Sanhedrin, and then the great Sanhedrin's on the other side. Okay, so they would go and notify the Sanhedrin. Once the sighting had been verified by the Sanhedrin would then declare the new month was proclaimed. Okay, so that's what it was during Yeshua's day. And I want to go to John. Let's go to the book of John because I want to think about what Yeshua said. Okay, so in John, I know it's in chapter 10.
They're still the calendar. No,
The Jewish calendar?
the one that you said.
The Aviv, A-V-I-V.
I just want to make sure that, those words I'm
Yeah.
not familiar.
Yes, the Aviv calendar. Because the Aviv, remember, is the barley that comes to a certain
Right.
stage. Okay. Okay.
John,
John 10. And I want to go to 2 verses here because this is, like I said, this is what y'all's just, dealing with me. Okay. So John 10 and verse 16. Look at what Yeshua is saying here. Also, I have other sheep which are not from this pen that I need to bring in, and they will hear my voice, and there they will be one flock with one shepherd. Okay. So he's talking about bringing the 2 together, and there's going to be one flock and one shepherd because he's emphasizing that we're to be in unity. If we go over to John chapter 17, and verse 20, look at how Yeshua is praying. He says, I pray not only for these, but for also those who will trust in me because of their word, that they may be all one, just as you, our Father, are united with me and I with you. And I pray that they will be united with us so that the world will believe that you have sent me. So Yah is about reconciling the brothers. He wants us to be all one. Okay. But then the question arises, okay, well, wait a minute. Aren't we to provoke Judah to jealousy? Because, in Romans chapter 10 and verse 19, it says, but I say, isn't it rather that Israel didn't understand, and I will provoke you to jealousy over a non-nation, a nation void of understanding, I will make you angry. So here's the question. Does us, being Ephraim, non-Jewish by birth, following another calendar, provoke brother Yehuda to jealousy?
I don't know. How can you propose them? With
Okay.
another calendar,
Yeah.
when their calendar, I mean,
Yeah.
it's so old.
Okay. She's saying, no, she doesn't think so, because how is that really going to provoke them?
what I'm saying is there are not as much sin when we do it as that we are doing it.
Okay. He said that, they think that they're watching that we are doing it, not necessarily when we're doing it.
The exact days.
Yeah. Okay.
What about Yeshua and his?
Okay. We're going to talk about some of that. So, okay. After, being there in the land, and we've known people and there and knowing, throughout the years, many Jews and stuff, that both believers and non-believers that were Jewish. And what I saw and say here is that actually, they look at people who are observing these holidays, but if you're doing it on a different day, they're like, they're mashooking, they're crazy. They're just ignorant. They don't know what they're doing. Is basically what they're thinking. They're thinking, they're just crazy and they just don't even look at it. And they're not really provoked by the fact that we're doing it if you do it on a different day. Okay. That's just what I've seen. So,
Well, that's what it is,
Okay.
because they go back generations.
yeah. And so, yeah, but like, okay, for example, Eddie with Mike, when we lived in that apartment in Jerusalem, that was over near Hebron Street. Mike, what was Mike's last name?
Oh.
Michael. I can't remember Michael's last name. Goldstein. Yeah, Goldstein's apartment. That when we lived there and it was time for Passover and we're cleaning out the leaven and we lived in the upstairs apartment and they see us getting rid of stuff. What did Michael say to you?
He said, he asked me what I was doing that.
Mhm.
And I said, I'm not doing it for any person, anything. I'm just.
He said that
what it says.
Michael asked
To
him,
do.
why are you getting rid of all that stuff? Why are you doing it for?
You know what he did?
Yeah.
He taped all his.
He said, I'm not doing it for another person. He said, but the word says to get rid of it. And Michael's like, well, you don't have to do that. You can just tape up your cabinets and you're fine. And he's like, but it doesn't say that. The word says you get it out of your homes. He's like, well, but my rabbi said that you have to do this. And it really started provoking him because we kept saying, well, the word says you get it out of your house. And then he was like, but my rabbi said this. And we're like, but the word says this. And he went and he started looking it up and he's like, I don't have to talk to my rabbi. And so that really provoked him because of the fact of how we were doing it then. So,
It
Okay.
did provoke, yeah.
yeah. So this week, one of the groups I'm with is we've actually started studying the book of Ruth. And I think this linked in with what we're doing here. So I wanted to read, just part of Ruth, because in the book of Ruth, we all know the story of Ruth and what happens. But I think especially in this first chapter, there were some things here that are relevant to what we're talking about. Remember Ruth's vow in Ruth 1, chapter 1, verse 16, her vow. Okay. So Ruth 1 and 16, it says, but Ruth says to Naomi, because remember, they were over, there was a famine in the land, Naomi and her husband and their sons go over to Moab. They ended up, marrying the Moabite wives, Ruth and Orpah, and then the husband dies, and then the sons die, and then Ruth is going to go back. And as she's going back with Naomi and Orpah, then Naomi tells them to go back home to your gods, whatever. And then in verse 16, Ruth says, don't press me to leave you, and don't stop following you. For wherever you go, I will go. For wherever you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May Yah bring terrible curses on me, and worse ones as well, if anything but death separates you and me. And we look at this, and most, pastors or whatever will say, oh, this is a perfect picture of the Gentile Ruth coming in and conversion and being part of the God of Israel. Okay. Because Ruth was a Moabite. She was a Gentile. And she chooses the God of Naomi. Okay. So here we have a picture of how a Gentile is actually going to become an Israelite. But what many fail to see is the meaning of what Ruth's statement here, her vow. Look at what she says. Where you go, I'll go. Where you stay, I'll stay. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. Where you die, I die. And nothing but death will separate me and you. Okay, so like I said, most will see this as a way for the Gentiles to come into the faith.
Well,
But
how was that? Because Yeshua wasn't there.
yeah, well, but this is later,
You saw.
yeah, because this is still, coming into the God.
Why was they coming?
Yeah, he was always there, but the church wouldn't see it that way.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That's not what the church.
But think about this, okay? If Ruth is a picture of the Gentile, Naomi is a picture of Israel. Does the church, or even those, even within the Hebraic roots or Torah observant movement, do this in regards to Israel? Because many will say, I want the God of Israel and your God will be my God. But do they say, well, wherever Israel goes, I go?
No.
Wherever you stay, I will stay. Your people are going to be my people.
I was telling him some things that Chuck's doing.
Yeah.
that-
So where you die, I die. So think about it. People don't realize how much anti-Semitism is deeply rooted even within the body. And lately, I was being more surprised is within the Torah observant community, there is anti-Semitism deeply rooted there. And think about what Ruth is saying. Ruth is saying, I have a connection to the people of Naomi now. Now, she's not saying I'm only connecting to the people who are good. She's saying the people as a whole I'm connecting to, regardless if they're good or not, Okay. And so she's making that connection with the people of Israel and to the land, because not only is to the people, but it's to the land, because she says, where you die, I'm going to die and I'm going to be buried there. This is going to be my land too. I'm going to be buried there. So she's making that that connection. So realizing that Ruth is our pattern to being grafted in, then we should have a connection not only to our Jewish brothers, okay, and the land. And the land, yeah.
You are a God-fearing person. I don't say God, I'm just God-fearing.
Mm-hmm.
You believe in his word, and how can you not have a connection with the land?
Because
Yeah.
because
Yeah,
a lot of
that's what
people
the
look at the
United States
negative
do.
aspects. They look and say, oh, well, look at here at the, we get into all the conspiracy theories and we look at the Bilderbergs and all these things, and they're like all these negative Jews, and they're saying, oh, well, see, then that's the whole Israeli government's corrupt, which there is corruption.
Well, I'm
But,
glad
okay.
God still- the trust of
Yeah.
our bill on the back, we got this pagan
Yeah.
pyramid, which is the Shriners and all
Yeah,
that.
there is no nation that is a true godly nation. Yeah.
And, their thing on money.
Yeah. So,
And like Trump's doing now, I'm telling the truth that he's doing it now, he's getting receiving gifts, and they're gonna ask something in return.
yeah. And so when you think about all of there's no nation that is a godly nation. They're all evil in some way. You have good leaders, you have bad leaders. But
Remember this, the word says, not man. So God said, my eyes
Yeah.
are always
Always on that land,
land. And
Eddie was saying that the word says, that his eyes are always on the land of Israel.
and also, when the New Jerusalem comes down, where's it coming down?
Yeah, and the New Jerusalem is coming down there. Yeah. So
So, that's
but
true.
and two, when you think about, okay, so that's one aspect. Ruth is our pattern there. But remember what Paul says in Romans 11, we think about the branches, and I'm just going to read this verse 11:17. But if some of the branches were broken off, and you, being a wild olive, were grafted in among them and have become equal sharers in the rich root of the olive tree, then don't boast as if you were better than the branches. However, if you do boast, remember that you are not supporting the root is supporting you.
Yeah.
So you will say branches were broken off so that I might be grafted in. True. But so what? They were broken off because of their lack of trust. However, you keep your place only because of your trust. So don't be arrogant. On the contrary, be terrified. For if God did not spare the natural branches, he certainly won't spare you. So take a good look at God's kindness and his severity. on one hand, severity toward those who fell off, but on the other hand, God's kindness toward you, provided that you maintain yourself in that kindness. Otherwise, you too will be cut off. So Paul's warning us not to be boastful and don't to think that just because we've been grafted in that we've got it right. Okay. Now, Paul is writing this to the church of Rome, and he hadn't even visited Rome yet. This is actually written, let's see, around, I can't remember, it was around 59 or something like that, around 57, I think 57, 59. And remember at this time that it was that Emperor Claudius had expelled the Jews from Rome at 49. Okay, in 49 AD, he had expelled Jews from Rome. And so that would have been including the Jewish believers. Okay, so this church or congregation that is in Rome is basically between 49 and now to Paul's time has become basically a Gentile church. Okay, and it's predominantly Gentile. Now Claudius dies, and some of the Jewish people return to Rome. So now they're starting to have Jews come back into the congregation. So the demographics of that church, which probably started out heavily Jewish, very small, Gentiles, because of Emperor Claudius expelled the Jews, that meant the believers were gone now. That left just the Gentile congregation. But now that Claudius has died, the Gentile congregation is still there, and some of the Jews are coming back. So now their congregation has shifted from a Jewish basically to a Gentile congregation. And you can understand what he's warning here, because who is he really talking to? He's talking to these Gentile believers that are here. Don't think you're arrogant now against your Jewish brothers, okay? He's warning them against that. And to think about, going back to Ruth. They're just grafted in. Yeah, they can be cut off. Okay. Yeah.
What is a Gentile?
Well, okay, I'm just saying, yeah, there's not really, but I'm saying a non-Jewish, not necessarily, okay, a non-Jewish, not necessarily a Gentile. Yeah, yeah. Okay, so think about Ruth. Do we identify with the people of Israel? Because many within the church body, within the Torah observant, within the Hebraic roots movement are now supporting Hamas, all Israel's enemies. And just think about the scenario. If you go back to Ruth, does Ruth now, because she's aligned herself with Naomi and says, your God will be my God, is she going to come up to Naomi and tell Naomi, well, y'all are doing it wrong. This is how y'all supposed to be doing it?
Nope.
Think about that, because basically that's what we do. Honestly, what did we do? That's exactly what we did. I did it. I know. In the beginning, that's what I was saying. Mm-hmm.
What if some pastors or members of the church would come over there and they wouldn't really so much testify.
And he's talking about, when we were living in Israel, that groups would come over.
We'll let you know what's true.
Yeah, and these pastors would come over with these church groups, and they would tell them to say, well, now we're believers. We're going to tell you how you should be doing it because y'all are wrong. And so we think about this. That's what many of us are doing. We who were Gentiles by birth, and now we're believers in the God of Israel. We come into the faith, and we're telling Naomi, which is Israel, how wrong they are and how they should worship. Okay, because that's what we're. Some are, yeah, but
Bill said this one time. He said, when you start seeing that you want to live and kind of be Hebraic, is we're not supposed to take it like a flashlight and stick it in their eyes and say, you're wrong. This is what you need to do. What you need to do is walk it out every day.
Yeah.
Put your light down to the ground.
He was just saying that.
Spray it out.
that we should
And then
be
they will see.
shining the
and either
light
they
on the
will
path, not
understand,
necessarily putting the flashlight
or
in their
either they-
face and saying
That's
you're
right.
wrong here.
I can hear him, Lisa.
I said, he was just saying that, you know,
No,
we should
I
be
can,
shining.
I can hear him.
Okay, you can't hear him. Okay, good.
No, I can.
Don't be arrogant about
He
it.
was saying that we should not shine the flashlight on someone's face and telling them how wrong they are, but should be shining the light at the word and showing them that this is, you know, what we're doing, instead of actually just being confrontational,
Right in their face.
instead of sticking in their face.
But that won't
Okay.
work.
Yeah, because that's definitely not going to work. Yeah.
Just make
Yeah,
them
and it's just, yeah, it's making them mad. It's provoking them, but not provoking them to jealousy. Yeah. There's a difference between provoking someone and provoking them to jealousy.
But like what y'all do, you were living it out. and
Yeah,
was
you live it out.
Because you lived the book.
Yeah, you're living the word. You wasn't telling him. Yeah, I mean, we weren't judging him because he was packing it.
Started, we met the rabbi.
Yeah.
Wilson.
Mhm.
They wanted to see what we were doing.
Yeah, they
not
wanna see-
because what you need to do.
Right.
They heard about it.
They heard it.
and
Mhm.
They wanted.
They want to
come and
see what your life is like. Yeah. And that's what it is. It's about walking it out in their sight. And then two, think about this. With Ruth, Yah leads Ruth to Boaz's field, even though it says by happenstance or whatever. There is no happenstance. There is no luck. That Yah leads her to the field of the kinsman, because we know Boaz is the kinsman redeemer. So Yah leads Ruth to the field of the kinsman. And as as Ruth begins to glean, she finally encounters Boaz. And look at chapter 2, Ruth chapter 2 and verse 10. She asked Boaz, she's like, why have I found favor in your sight? And look at what he says. In Ruth 2 and 10, she fell on her face, prostrating herself, and she said to him, why are you showing me such favor? Why are you paying attention to me? After all, I'm only a foreigner. And Boaz answered her, I've heard the whole story, everything you've done for your mother-in-law since your husband died, including how you left your father and your mother and the land you were born in to come to a people whom you knew nothing about beforehand. May Yah reward you for what you've done, and may you be rewarded in full by Yah, the Elohim of Israel, under whose wings you've come for refuge. So Boaz's response is that Ruth is displaying such great character in regards to how she was treating Naomi and the Jewish people. Yeah. And that she didn't even know anything about him. And that is that the kind of character that, the church, Ruth is displaying toward Naomi today, the Jewish people. Yeah. 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 And so, yeah, don't touch her. Yeah.
Because Naomi was the one that touched her when I know, but Ruth did it because she was young.
Yeah, she was young.
Plus, she honored her mother-in-law.
Yeah, and so think about this. Are we today being humble and kind? Because how is the kinsman redeemer going to look at our actions toward Naomi? Are we reacting that same way as Ruth toward Naomi and the Jewish people? Eddie. So, because are we being humble and kind and submissive to them, or are we telling them this is the correct way? So now, with that said, let's go back to the calendar issue because we still hadn't answered the question. Okay. So, with the calendar issue, I want to look at another verse, and this was not in Leviticus chapter 23 about the feast, but let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 17. Deuteronomy 17. Okay. Verse 8. If a case comes before you at your city gate, which is too difficult for you to judge concerning bloodshed, civil lawsuit, personal injury, or any other controversial issue, you are to get up and go to the place which Yah your Elohim will choose. and appear before the Kohanim, who are Leviim, and the judge in the office at that time, and seek their opinion, and they will render a verdict for you. You will then act according to what they have told you there in that place, and that Yah will choose. And you are to take care to act according to all of their instructions. In accordance with the Torah they teach you, you are to carry out judgment they render, not turning aside to the right or to the left from the verdict they declare to you. Any presumptuous enough to not pay attention to the Kohen appointed there to serve Yah, your Elohim, or the judge, that person must die. Thus you will exterminate such wickedness from Israel. So Moshe was told to appoint these judges. And by the time we get to the temple days, we see, these judges are actually, the Sanhedrin. Okay. And there's 71 in the Sanhedrin. And where they get that from is because Moshe is going to appoint 70 judges, and the 70 plus the Moshe makes 71. So that's where they get the 71 from, the Sanhedrin. Okay. Now, notice that it says that you are to act according to their instructions and the judgments that they render. And that we shouldn't act presumptuously to do what we think is right. So it says that we are to honor the decision that's made by those that were in authority. So then here comes the question. Who has the authority to determine the calendar?
Here on earth.
Yeah, because this is what we're talking about. I mean, it doesn't matter when we're in heaven because we have eternity. We don't have to worry about the calendar then.
Before it's been appointed.
It's always been appointed. By who though? Who has the authority really to determine the calendar? That's our question, and I think that's the biggest problem we've got. Yeah, it goes what most. Okay, so let's go to the scripture. Exodus 40 and verse 15. So we're going to go to a couple of places here. And this is the issue. I mean, this is where I think we're getting to the heart of the issue. It's not like who's got the right one, because I don't think, anyway, Exodus 40. I think that not one's completely right, but Exodus 40 and verse 15. And it says, and you are to anoint them as their father, so they can serve me in the office of Cohen. Their anointing will signify that the office of Cohen is theirs through all the generations. Okay, so it says Aaron's sons are the Kohanim, and it's going to be through all generations. All generations. Okay, so all generations. So if we go over what we just read a minute ago in Deuteronomy, it says that you have an issue, whether it's a civil or a controversial or personal or something that is just too hard for you. Who are you to go to? To the Kohanim. Okay, and they would render judgment, and you go by whatever they said. Okay. Now let's go to Ezekiel, because we get over to the third temple, or what's called the third temple, in Ezekiel chapter 44. This hasn't happened yet. Okay. In verse 23.
Ezekiel 44:23.
Yeah. And it says, they are to teach my people the difference between holy, kadosh, set apart, okay, and common, whole, okay, and enable them to distinguish between what is clean, tahor, and tameh, what is unclean. They are to be judges in controversial matters, and they are to render decisions in keeping with my rulings. At all of my designated festivals, they are to keep my laws and regulations, and they are to keep my Shabbats holy. Okay. And I read that verse and I see they. Who are these people? Who are they? Okay. So we got to go back to verse 15. However, the Kohanim, who are the Leviim, who are descendants of Zadok, who took care of my sanctuary when the people of Israel went astray from me. They are the ones who approach me and serve me. It is they who will attend to me and offer the fat and the blood, says Yah Elohim. Okay, so here we got the third temple and the sons of Zadok, which are Levi'im, which are the Kohanim, okay, who are making the ruling. So then that means, do we go with the Zadokite calendar? Because they're the ones that are doing this, okay? And that's the whole question now, because is it the Zadokite calendar? Right. Okay. And just the short version of the Zadokite calendar, the premise of the Zadokite calendar is based on the ones, the reason it's called Zadokite is because it's after the sons of Zadok. Okay. And that there were the sons of Zadok who lived in the Essene community of Qumran. Okay. So those who know about Israel know that Qumran is where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found in 1947. Okay. And that these writings that were found in the caves of Qumran basically were, from this community. And in these writings and these Dead Sea Scrolls, they outlined a calendar that the Essene community followed. And the premise is that since some of the line of the Zadok were there, that this is the correct calendar. Okay. And basically, I'm not going to go because it's a complicated how you determine the Zadok calendar is, the new moon's always going to be on a Wednesday, and it's always, going to be, 30 days in a month, except for certain months. And then you have 31. So it's all crazy how that's calculated, but okay. So that's the premise of it. But then here's the issue, because if that's true, they're basing the sons of Zadok were there at the Essene community. That is true. The sons of Zadok were at the Essene community. But what a lot of people don't want to acknowledge is not only were the sons of Zadok, some of them in the Essene community, but the sons of Zadok were the Sadducees. Because in Hebrew, Sadducees is actually Zadokim, not Sadducees. That's a Greek word. Okay. But Zadokim are the Sadducees. So the Sadducees during the Second Temple, because we think of the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the Essenes. Okay. So during the Second Temple day, we had these three groups of Jewish people. Okay. The Pharisees, Sadducees, and the Essenes. Okay. The Pharisees actually in Hebrew is Prushim, and it really means separate. Parash means to separate. Okay. So it is talking about people that were separate. So the Pharisees were the ones that were strictly adhering to the laws of, clean and unclean, and they were separating things. Okay. So that were the Pharisees. So they were, looking at the law, and this is what you were supposed to do. The Sadducees, the Zadokim, well, let me go. Okay. Were actually the minority. Okay. They were in the minority because if you think about all the Levi'im, all the Kohanim that were there, the Zadokim was a smaller group. Okay. So they were in the minority, but they were very powerful because they still trace their lineage back to Zadok. Okay. And they wielded a lot of power during the Second Temple days. They were actually the ones that controlled the temple. And in my brain, and I don't know about y'all's, when you always think about the Pharisees controlling the temple, the Pharisees didn't control the temple in Yeshua's day. It's the Sadducees that did. Okay. They controlled the temple. The Pharisees actually controlled the little synagogues that were around. Okay. But the Sadducees controlled the temple. So, and they were in the minority, but they were corrupt. Okay. They're corrupted because they, a lot of times, disagreed with the Pharisees. Because remember, I think back in church, how could you tell the difference between Pharisees and Sadducees? The Sadducees are sad, you see, because they don't believe in the resurrection. So they always wanted to be opposite of the Pharisees. And this was something that I found, is that they wanted to always combat what the Pharisees said. And they wanted to show that they were in opposition to their beliefs. For example, which this was amazing to me, that a Sadducee, which they were the ones in charge of the temple, they would have been the high priest because they were from the sons of Zadok. They would offer incense on Yom Kippur first by placing it on the coals of the pan outside of the Holy of Holies. Because you remember, he had to take in the pan with the coals on it into the Holy of Holies and put the incense on it right there between the mercy, right at the mercy seat. Okay. But what they did is they would actually do it outside of the Holy of Holies and then bring it inside, flaunting that they were, they were not like the Pharisees. Okay. And by doing so, what happened? The high priest died. Okay. But the Sadducees were so set on proving the Pharisees wrong that they would break Torah just to show that point. And according to the Talmud, the first temple stood 410 years. The second temple, 420 years. During the first temple's time period of 410 years, there were only 18 high priests. But during the second temple time period, which was corrupted during Yeshua's day, there were more than 300 high priests. Why? Because what are they doing? The Sadducees are wanting to flaunt that they're not the Pharisees, so they're basically disobeying Torah to show that I'm going against them. Okay.
Was this the replacement of the Levites? Because they did.
Well, they are the Levites.
Yeah, but they away from God. Because here I was reading.
Well, that's what they're saying. They've become corrupt.
The Levites, they can go by Zadok and say to Pharisees now. They were only doing like the slaughter the animals, things like that. He said they could still come that far and do that.
No, okay. There's a difference. No, there's a difference. When you're thinking about Levites, Levites are all of when you look at Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, all of them would have been Levites. All of their children would have been Levites, but only Aaron's sons would be priests. So Moses, Miriam, and Aaron's kids could all come into the court of the Levites, but only Aaron's kids could be the priest to go into the Holy of Holies. And then only, okay. Well, so they did, they did. Okay.
But regardless, anybody that was a priest, Levite, whatever, they were anointed.
They were anointed.
And regardless, just like Saul was anointed by God.
Because they had the anointing oil. Yeah, they were anointed. Yes.
That's what David told that one. He says, you still, no matter how.
Because he was just saying, regardless of the fact they were still anointed. And that these were the anointed of God. So you think about the priest and the king, regardless of who they were still anointed. Okay. It doesn't mean that they were chosen, but it means they were anointed. That's just like Yah tells them later that they're not to go into certain places because they had the anointing oil on them. Okay. Yes, the Sanhedrin. Okay, so this is why I said it gets a whole, like in Hebrew, what's called a balagan, a mess. Okay. So now wait a minute. So here we go. We've got the Hillel calendar, which is the Jewish calendar, actually established as Israel was actually in ruin. Okay. So when the Hillel calendar, the Jewish calendar today, comes into existence is because Israel ends up being destroyed, and after the fall of, the temple fell, whatever, there was no longer an established court remain when Israel ends up getting taken over. And because there was no temple and no court, Rabbi Hillel established a calendar because he saw what was happening. And he's like, okay, we're going to be taken over and the children of Israel are going to be dispersed. And so he developed this calendar to keep Israel, while they're dispersed among the nations, in unity of celebrating the feast. And he got all these, they're very smart, got all these mathematicians, whatever. And they came up with this mathematical formula. And it's, when you look at it, it was developed to keep them in unity, even without a temple, so that they would be able to still celebrate Passover and Sukkot and everything at the correct time when they're living the right, that everybody would know when it was going to be done. And it was to keep the people from assimilating with the world. And so, like I said, it was done with this mathematical formula. And what's amazing is that they didn't do it by the sighting of the new moon. They did it by math, okay? Mm-hmm. And when you look at the Jewish Hillel calendar, it's mostly right on track. I mean, there may be a day off, but for the most part, for about almost 2,000 years, it has pretty much been accurate. Think about how amazing that is, that you used a mathematical formula and got it that close. And so today, we don't have a temple. So are we to follow that calendar? Or what about the Zadok calendar? Okay. But then that got me to thinking about, regardless of what you believe about the Jewish calendar, okay, the Hillel calendar, historically, there have been many events that have taken place on important biblical dates, like the first temple being destroyed, the second temple being destroyed, all on the same date, the World War I beginning all on the same date. And, and when you start looking at that, well, what date is that talking about? The 9th of Av, the Spanish Inquisition being expelled, with Christopher Columbus not leaving on the 9th of Av, all of that happening on dates on the Jewish calendar. But what calendar is it? It's the Hillel calendar. So if the Hillel calendar is wrong, then why did y'all always seem to have these important events happening on the calendar that they're following instead of on another calendar? Mm-hmm. So that's a question. Yeah. Okay. So we read so far, still a mess, that the priests were the ones that were to render the decisions. We also see that the priests were to be sons of Zadok in regarding to his rulings. And we know that some of the priests were good, but there were also many bad ones. And even if the priesthood is corrupt, the office of priesthood is still valid. Yeah. Okay. It's still the priesthood. It's like he didn't wipe it out and say, okay, we're gonna do away with the priesthood. Okay. So it's similar to us today. For example, the presidency. Even if we have a corrupt president, that doesn't mean the presidency is done away with and now we start over with a dictator or whatever. It is, you still have the office there. Sometimes we have corrupt ones, sometimes we have good ones. Okay, it's still there. But here is the passage that really stuck with me. Okay, we're going to go to Numbers chapter 18. And I know it's still a mess, but this is the one that really stuck with me. Numbers 18. And I'm going to start in verse 1. Yah says to Aaron, you, your sons, and your father's line will be responsible for anything that goes wrong in the sanctuary. You and your sons will be responsible for anything wrong in your service as Kohanim. But you are to bring your kinsmen from the tribe of Levi, along with yourselves, to work together with you, to help you and your sons with you when you are there before the tent of meeting. They are to be at your disposal, performing all kinds of tasks related to the tent. Only they are not to come near the holy furnishings or the altar, so that neither you or they will die. They will work together with you in your duties related to the tent of meeting, whatever your service in the tent may be, but an unauthorized person is not to come near you. You will take charge of all the holy things in the altar, so that no one will longer be angered against the people of Israel. I myself have taken your kinsmen from the Leviticus among the people of Israel, and they have been given as a gift to Yah for you, so that you can perform the service of the tent of meeting. You and your sons with you will exercise your prerogatives and duties as Kohanim in regard to everything having to do with the altar within the curtain. I entrust the service of the required Kohanim to you. The unauthorized person who tries to perform it is to be put to death. Yah said to Aaron, I myself have put you in charge of the contributions you've given to me. Everything consecrated by the people of Israel I have given and set aside for you and your sons. This is a perpetual law. Here is what is to be yours of the holy, especially holy things taken from the fire, every offering they make, that is, every grain offering, sin offering, and guilt offering of theirs that they turn over to me will be especially holy for you and your sons. So look at what it says in verse 1. To Aaron and his sons, you will be responsible for anything that goes wrong in the sanctuary, and you will be responsible for the service. Okay. So Aaron and his sons will bear the guilt of the sanctuary and the priesthood. It's their responsibility to declare the feast, the calendar, and rulings in a judicial case. And if they mess up, if we're going by their calendar and they mess up and pick the wrong date, does it fall on us?
No.
It falls on them. If we're doing their calendar.
Right.
Okay. And notice in verse 3, it says the Levites are there at their disposal, but they are not to come near of any of the holy things, because if the Levites do, they will die. Why? Because they're not the Kohanim. So then that goes back to the question. So does that mean that we follow everything that Judaism says? No. It just means that in matters of the holy things, like the dates, the calendars, and the feasts, that we are to follow their rulings. Okay.
And they will be
Regardless of whether or not it's on the right date. Because if we try to change the calendar of the feast, then we're encroaching on their authority, just like Korach did. Because remember what Korach tried to do? Korach was a Levite, and he told Moses, well, I'm a Levite just as much as you are, but why can't I do this? And what happened? The earth opened up. You remember? And it was encroaching on their duty. Okay. Because he was a Levite now. So think about this. Isn't that the same thing that the kingdom of Ephraim is doing? Isn't that the same thing that they did? They didn't want to go to Jerusalem to worship. So what did they do? They started their own place to worship. Not only did they start their own place to worship, but they set their own dates. Okay. So, and that's another example of what happened. The kingdom of Ephraim is doing that. Okay. Let's go to 2 Chronicles. There's another picture of this in scripture. Okay. In 2 Chronicles, chapter 26. Okay, 2 Chronicles chapter 26. And I'm going to start in verse 16. Okay. But when he was strong, he became arrogant. This is talking about King Uzziah, and which caused him to become corrupt, so that he sinned against Yah, his Elohim, by going into the temple of Yah to burn incense on the incense altar. This is the king doing that. Okay. Azariah Azarahu the Cohen went in after him with 80 men of Yah's Kohanim, brave men, and they stood up to Uzziah the king, and they told him, "It isn't your job, Uzziah, to burn incense to Yah. The job of burning incense belongs to the Kohanim, the descendants of Aaron." So here's this king thinking, well, I'm the king. I can go in there and do it. Okay.
Well,
And then, who've been consecrated, get out of the sanctuary. You've trespassed, and Yah Elohim will not honor you for this. This made Uzziah angry as he stood there with a censer in his hand, ready to burn incense. And in his anger at the Kohanim, Zaharat broke out on his forehead right in front of the Kohanim in the house of Yah beside the altar of incense. Remember, Zaharat is like leprosy, okay? We call it leprosy, but it's not really, okay. Azarahu, the chief Cohen, and all the Kohanim stared at him. There he was with Zaharat on his forehead. Quickly, they threw him out of there, and indeed, he himself hurried to get out because Yah had struck him. And Uzziah the king had Zaharat until his dying day. Remember back when we talked about the leper king? What happened to the lepers? They're cast out. They're separated. They had to cover their mouth and yell Tameh, Tameh anytime they couldn't go into the temple ever. And it says here, he lived that way the rest of his life. Now, was he still king? Yes. Yeah. He was still king. He was still there, but he overstepped and tried to encroach on something he wasn't, it was not his job. And he lived in a separate house because he had Zaharat and was not allowed into the house of Yah. Meanwhile, okay, so anyway, so here we've got this king who's trying to encroach and do something he doesn't have the right to do. So again, the question is, do we as Ephraim have the right to change or establish a calendar because we believe they're wrong?
No.
And it comes down to whose authority really is it? Because is it more important for the people of God to be in unison in regards to the festivals? Or is it more important to be right in your own eyes and keep the festival on the date? I would think. Yeah.
Well,
so
if the rabbinical calendar says this, I think we ought to.
I mean, this is why I'm just saying this has been dealing with me.
But now, hearing this, you think, well, if we go by the rabbinical calendar, if they miss it, they're the ones
responsible. Yeah, because it's their job. I mean, that's just like, yeah, I mean, that's what I'm saying. Because honestly, we started out with the Jewish calendar and then we moved to the Aviv calendar. And that's what we've done for years is that. And then now you've got all of these calendars that are coming up. And then you're like, it's confusion. Yeah. It is chaos and confusion. And we know Yah is not a God of chaos.
He said, this is on you.
Yeah. And that's what, that's what. And I mean, even look at, think about Eddie being head or priest of the home, there are things that's taken off of me that I'm like, hey, you got it. I don't care. It's going to come on your head, not on me. And I'll be glad to relinquish that because of that. And to think about, it's his responsibility more than, what comes in this house than on mine. Right. Because he being head of the household, it is going to fall on his head. And he's going to have to answer to Yah for a lot of that. So, okay. And forehead. Yeah. The leprosy did was on the forehead. That's the only place it mentioned. Which everybody's going to be able to see it. You ain't masking it. It ain't like covered or you close. It's the mark on your, And to think about, because too, it talks about that your Passover, if you're following the feast, it is going to be a mark on your sign and your forehead. Well, here now you're doing something you're not, so he's marking you. So, that's a good point. And to think about, Yah is not an author of confusion.
Right.
His ways are easy, and, but, some people are going to say, okay, but wait a minute, we should be celebrating the feast on the right day. We should be doing it. Yes, we should. But the new moon has to be correct. And who determines the new moon? And it goes back.
So how do you handle the pastors today? Some of them are good, some of them not. When they give a ruling, when they give a decree,
Mhm.
and some of them are wrong. I mean, you look at some of these mega pastors, some of these people, I mean, some of them are corrupt.
Yeah. And I think, but you can always leave that
Well,
congregation and go to a different congregation, but it's not like a calendar, what I'm
I
saying?
know, even then, if they once were anointed,
Yeah.
then what do you do then? I
Mhm.
mean, still, I guess you could say they're wrong.
Yeah.
And you don't have to follow that wrong.
Yeah.
And follow them and agree with them, but I guess it's not something we,
But they're not
set.
setting, when you think about, these pastors in these churches, they're not setting dates.
No,
They're keeping the calendar of, Rome.
I'm just saying, what are some of these people in the congregation, what are they supposed to do?
Yeah. And,
Through the spirit,
Yeah.
they don't have to make a choice.
They're
It's like
gonna-
if the pagan holiday,
Yeah.
then
They're gonna have
They
to-
still live.
yeah, they're going to, that's, Okay, so then we come back. I'm going to come back to what was happening in Yeshua's day, because here's another point, and this is something that you may not be familiar with, but we talked about how the new moon was sighted during Yeshua's day. But what happens if it's cloudy? Because there were times Eddie and I were out, we lived that apartment on Lode Street, and we would go out looking for the new moon, and we'd actually have to walk up to like Ben Yehuda because it was higher up, and we still couldn't see the new moon because it might have been cloudy or overcast that day. Yeah, you could have seen that. But what happened in Yeshua's day? Okay, so think about in Yeshua's day, what would happen? Okay, because in Yeshua's day, if the sky was cloudy and overcast on the night they expected it, because they know it could happen the 29th or the 30th, on the night they expected it, and they go out there and they could not see it, they would postpone the proclamation. It would not be the new moon. Now, wait a minute. Yeshua is Yah. Would he not know? He created the heavens and the earth. Would he not know if that was a new moon or not up there?
He's not the fullness.
Okay, he's not the fullness. But could he have not asked the Father then and said, okay, well, you know what? I know it's really the new moon behind that cloud for me and my disciples, so that they're going to celebrate the holiday on the right day. We're going to declare this the new moon so that way they can have Passover on the right day. Why did he not, we never see him do that. He didn't speak up and ever do that. He could have proclaimed the holiday so at least that his Talmudim could have been celebrating on the right day, but that didn't happen. He went along with the normative Judaism in order to be in unison with them. Because, think about Yah's in the process. He's in the process of restoring Israel, all of Israel, both houses. It's a process. Yep. And yet instead of, thinking about with the calendar, there being restoration with us all coming into unity, there's division, which I don't think Yah's pleased about. So is he really trying to show us to be in unity first? And that doesn't mean that the traditional Jewish Hillel calendar is 100% correct and accurate, but it's been pretty much right for almost 2,000 years, a day or so off. And, just think about this. What if there would come a day, just saying that the entire Hebraic roots, Messianic movie, Torah observant, whatever you want to call it, body would come together and observe the festivals all on the same date as Brother Yehuda, Can you imagine what Brother Yehuda then would look at all of us Ephraimites celebrating and worshiping in unity at the same time that they're doing it and singing praises to Yah and Yeshua and walking in the ways of Torah? Maybe then they would say, well, maybe Yeshua is the Messiah, because they're all, I mean, you know, we're getting all in unity together, even though they're not recognizing it. But as long as we're divided, they're not seeing that. And, you know, it's not happening. And two, we think about, you know, it's not our job to restore all things. That's Elijah's job, not our job to restore all things. So.
And two, we have to just pray to God, you know, for his will.
Yeah.
And do what we can do. He knows our hearts. And live what we know that Yeshua lives.
Yeah. We just have to pray and just seek him. And that's,
Yeah,
I mean,
and
but
he
I
prayed.
think,
He was crying.
but a lot of people within the Hebraic movement will say, well, I'm praying and they're wrong and we're right. But two, that comes back to that heart attitude.
Have our hearts set right with God,
Yeah.
not people.
Yeah. But what I'm saying is, but we look at that and we say they're wrong. They're not going out looking for the new moon. And I can see the new moons on this night and they're not calling it until the next day. What's going on? And we see that, but it comes back to that verse in Numbers 18 where it says it's on their head,
Yeah.
not on my head. If they got it wrong and I'm following their calendar, it's going to be on them. But if I'm following and making my own calendar, then I'm stepping across and doing something that the Levites and the Sanhedrin should be doing. So, okay. So you go back to, why does Yah really set the nation of Israel apart? Because they were to be example to the rest of the world. And the priests, the Kohanim, were to be to the Israelite what the Israelites were called to be to the world. So the priests were to be a higher example. They were to set the example to the rest of Israel, and then the rest of Israel was to set it to the rest of the world.
Yeah. Someone to represent him on earth until Yeshua.
Yeah.
So it had to be the holy priest, you know.
Yeah, the priests were representing him, yeah. And he tells them exactly how you're to do it.
Okay, Joshua, you do it. Now,
Mhm.
it had to be someone holy from a priestly line, you know, and to carry on to
Yeah.
Yeshua came, and then.
Even after that. Because
After that,
yes.
There's
So-
gotta be some leader of God.
Yeah, there has to be one that is accountable, and that person is going to
You
be
just
held.
have to find that one that you can see that walks in the spirit of Yah, that you can trust.
Right. But I mean, there is a difference between, you know, when you think about, we are not Levites, you know, we are not Levites. And just because someone is a pastor doesn't make them a Levite.
Right.
You know, there's a big difference between that, you know, when you think of pastors, just think a teacher, not necessarily Levite. So there is a,
Okay, so on YouTube, you've got these different leaders
Mhm.
teaching that this is the correct calendar.
yes.
If you follow that person's calendar, then are they the one held responsible?
I think that ain't what the word said. Yeah, because if you're following that person, then you're in agreement with that calendar. But Yah is saying here that when it comes to my priesthood, I've set them in charge. And if they determine something wrong, then it is off of you.
That's why I was asking, because, you know.
Yeah.
I mean,
So that's why, yeah, I mean, that's a good question. Because if you think about, like, if you're following that person and they're on that calendar, it doesn't mean, the word doesn't say if they create their own calendar, it's on them. No, it is saying if you create your own calendar, you're encroaching on what is, you know, the Levites.
In my time of all this coming up,
Mhm.
when I started leaning toward one particular thing,
Mhm,
I kind of kept that day,
mhm.
but I also kept the
Other
others
day,
as well
yeah.
that I had known. I kept both because
Mhm.
I was uncertain.
Yeah. And
And I
that's,
wasn't sure.
Mhm.
Something in my spirit made me do both because I just didn't know.
you don't know. But I mean, that's where I look at it, that this is the only one that he says that is going to be
Right,
right.
right.
And two, when you look at, okay,
Well, it's just like Yeshua said, you, he said, like in the end, he said, they'll say, go here, he's over there. Go
Yeah.
there, go there. That's right. Everybody be searching for everything.
Yeah. And there's a lot of
But
confusion.
everybody-
People are going in every different direction because it's like it says that, you know, they're going to go to and fro. Okay, so if we go back to Leviticus 23:1, it says, and Yah spoke to Moshe, saying, speaking to the children of Israel and saying to them concerning my Moedim of Yah, remember these are of him, not of the Jews, that you shall proclaim these as Mikra Kodesh. These are my Moedim. So these appointed feasts are of Yah. Okay, they're called Moedim. The root of that word Moedim is Ya'ad, which means to fix, appoint, to meet, or betroth. And when you also look at that root Ya'ad, we have the word ayin dalet in it, which is ed, which is where we get the word witness, which is also the word edah, which is a congregation. So this is truly saying that, you know, the congregation is also the bride that is doing these feasts. Now, going back to the calendar question, I think it's all boils down to the authority. And at this time, we do have a Sanhedrin, but not a real Sanhedrin. It's not a working one because they can't really make rules. There's no temple. We don't really have Kohanim rulings. And that if we go back to the last ruling that they had concerning the calendar, it was the Hillel calendar. And for me, I think that's going to be my basis now, is going to be the Hillel calendar. Even though I still believe, you know, there are things wrong with it, but I think it takes it off of us according to scripture. Well, it's said that they're going to, that they are in charge of doing that and not encroaching on their ability. Okay, so last part, done with the calendar. We go over to chapter 24. That's a mess, but everybody's quiet and everybody's confused. Okay, the last part here is in chapter 24. I'm going to go down to verse 10. We've got a blasphemer. In 24:10, it says, there was a man who was the son of a woman of Israel and an Egyptian father who went out among the people of Israel, and the son of a woman of Israel had a fight in the camp with a man of Israel. And in the course of which the son of the woman of Israel uttered the name Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh and a curse, and brought him to Moshe. His mother's name was Shlomit, the daughter of Debri of the tribe of Dan. And they put him under guard until Yah would tell them what to do. And Yah said to Moshe, take the man who cursed outside of the camp, have everyone who heard him lay their hands on his head, and have the entire community stone him. Then tell the people of Israel, whoever curses his God will bear the consequences of his sin. And whoever blasphemes the name of Yah will be put to death. The entire community must stone him. The foreigner as well as the citizen is to be put to death if he blasphemes the name. So first of all, we look at this and we see that his father was an Egyptian, his mother was an Israelite, so he is of a mixed relationship. Yeah. And in this fight, he blasphemes. Well, you know, okay, this parsha is focused on with being set apart, you know, so we're looking at what does that mean? Okay, it's talking about your actions. We said could also blaspheme Yah. And it says the word, he says he curses. Yeah. So that word curse is kalal. And kalal means to this, you know, because there's 3 different words for curse. Kalal, arar. I don't remember the third one, but there's another one. I don't remember the third one. That's not used as much. Okay, so kalal means to be slight, to be trifling, or made little account of, or light. So basically, the blasphemer was making Yah's name to be slight or of little account or insignificant. This is why even if we're using the name, and I think we should use the name, it should not be something that is used common every day, you know. And that goes back to why Judaism didn't do that, because they had all these Gentiles, non-Jewish believers coming in, and they were using the name and all this stuff, and they were using it all the time, and it wasn't something to be, you know, it could be blasphemed. Okay, the word for blaspheme is actually nakav, which means to pierce, perforate, or appoint or designate. And so when you look at verse 16, 24:16 in the Hebrew, it says, Vaynokim Shem Yadhevavhe, which is, if we look at that, which is, and he appoints the name Yadhevavhe.
Oh.
So what does that mean to blaspheme in the name and to curse the name? I think it's certainly more than just using the name of Yah in a curse when you're shouting in anger, but it's talking about representing the authority of Yah and his purposes. Because, in Revelation, it says, in Revelation 3, in verse 8, it says, I know what you're doing. Look, I put you in front of you an open door and no one can shut it. I know you have but little power, yet you have obeyed my message and you have not disowned me. And in John 16:23, it says, when that day comes, you won't ask anything of me. Yes, indeed, I tell you that whatever you ask from the Father, he will give you in my name. So when we think about asking in the name or something like that, it's more than just, saying in Yeshua's name or in Jesus' name or whatever, and that he's going to give it to you. It is about agreeing with his authority and his will. So just because you ask for something and you're tacking on in Yeshua's name or in Jesus' name there, doesn't mean that it's in line with his authority and his will. If it lines with, and you look at John, it says, when that day comes and you ask of me and it's aligning with my authority and will, then anything if it's aligning, if you're praying and aligning it by will, then it is going to be done. It doesn't mean that we're getting whatever we want. We must ask in alignment with his will. So, when I think about, he's talking about the blasphemer there, that he's actually doing something in the authority that's not in the will of Yah, and it's basically blaspheming Yah in front of the people. So, and like I said, when we look at the rest of the parsha, the Leviticus 21:22 talks about the priest and the high priest. Leviticus 23, the feast days. Leviticus 24 talks about the temple, the oil and the menorah, or the oil and the showbread. And then it goes into the blaspheming. And what do they all have in common? It's all about being set apart. And remember back at the beginning, we read in Leviticus 21, in verse 6, it says, well, we didn't read this, but in Leviticus 21 and verse 6, it says, rather they are to be holy for their Elohim and not to profane the name of their God, for they are the ones who present Yah with offerings made by fire, the bread of their God. Therefore, they must be holy. So when we think about that blasphemer, it doesn't even end until, verse 23, but they're all related because it's all about your actions and how we can profane Yah and how we can set him apart. So the one who injures or kills another man basically is desecrating Yah's name. If you're murdering somebody, you're desecrating Yah's name. And then two, it says, and last two verses in Hebrews 10 and verse 24, it says, let us keep paying attention to one another and in order to spur each other on to love and good deeds, not neglecting our own congregational meetings as some have made a practice of doing, but rather encouraging each other. And let us do this all the more as you see the day approaching. And the last verse I wanted to read, which is, behold how good and how pleasant it is with brothers to dwell together in unity. Psalms 133.
Yay. Sisters to all be in unity.
So I know that was a mess, a little different, but it's, and like I said, for those who haven't been in it a while, the calendar issue may not be a big thing, but I think it's about, it's about unity.
No, because, somebody's y'all held the leaders responsible for it because the people that were listening, they only knew to be taught to what how the priest or the teachers were telling them to do it. So that's how they would learn to do it, They had to trust them.
See, it's something that I talked about in the last couple of parshas
Is, really, are we encroaching on stuff that we shouldn't be encroaching on? And this was something I was talking to a girlfriend last night, and we got into discussion about is that, a lot of times people in the, I don't say church, but whatever, are trying to, or saying, oh, well, we'll spiritualize this verse and it applies to me, when it's clearly talking about the high priest or the priest. And are we encroaching on something that should not be applied to us? Because when you look at certain verses, there are certain verses in Torah that are written specifically for men. There's certain verses that are written specifically for women. There's certain verses that are written specifically for the land. There's certain verses that are written specifically for the priest. But with us coming in, we want to spiritualize everything and say, oh, well, this applies to me, when it's actually not talking to you. It's talking to somebody else.
I'm glad it's one's responsibility.
Mhm.
Because that takes it off of us. That takes it off us.
Do that one before you go.
Verse 14, but thanks be to Elohim, who always leads us on to overcome in Messiah and manifests us through the fragrance of his knowledge in every place. And that's 2 Corinthians 2, verse 14. That's really good. Yep, that's a good one. So,
I want to be that fragrance.
yeah, we want to be a good fragrance. Yep.
Yeah.
Sweet
Well,
smelling.
we're supposed to send that up to y'all
Yeah.
with our praises, with our life. That's a sweet incense up to y'all. Amen. If everybody wants to get ready, we're gonna have the blessing over the congregation. So we'll be just getting ready now. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yevarekaka Yahava Virishmeya Yair Yahava Pinava Ileka Vihuneka Yesayahava Pinavileka Vayishim Laka Shalom. May Yahweh bless you and keep you. May Yahweh make his face to shine on you and show you his favor. May Yahweh lift up his face towards you and give you peace. B'Shem Yeshua HaMashiach, Sar Shalom. Go in peace. Amen.